All right, we're going to look at how to create multiple GUIDs per GUID. And this is an unlikely event that we would ever face, but just in case we want to create multiple GUIDs per GUID, we'll look at how to do that. So an example scenario of this that I can think about is if we had a situation where we had like a distribution server that would distribute data across multiple servers, and on each record of the distribution server there might be a GUID, and that GUID is going to be used to track which records exist across those other servers that it's distributing. And then on each server itself there is a GUID, and so we'll look at an example of this in a second. So let's say that we have a batch of 100 records. Those would be assigned a GUID on the distribution server, but each individual record would have their own GUID. And so that's going to be kind of the situation that we're looking at that I develop. Now, the reason why this is unlikely to ever occur is because this is the possible combinations of a GUID, and that's a lot. And I highlighted trillion here, as you can see. So you can see it is much, much higher, and that's just one column of GUIDs. So consider if we had a GUID for each GUID, right? That would be a lot. And I'm not saying that there's never a situation for that, but honestly, I think that when I look at this combination, more than likely like a big int plus a GUID is going to suffice. But there might be an event in the future. You never know just how much data we're collecting. There might be an event in the future in which it would qualify for a GUID with a GUID. So in the TSQL here, what I'm doing is I'm declaring the GUID here that's a unique identifier. This is what would be reused on, this would be the distribution server GUID in our example. But you'll notice that when what I'm doing is inserting these different records, on each of these select statements, there's a new ID. So the new ID is going to be different as we see on this server ID. We see that's how it comes out. It's different. But the GUID, which is declared up here, is going to be the same across all 5 of these records. So this would be, let's say, the batch. Let's associate this with the batch. So the distribution server has a batch of 100 records, and that batch has this new ID associated with it. When it distributes it across the other servers, so let's say this is server 1, it will have this batch on the distribution server right here, but on this server there's going to be individual records, and that's how we would assess the individual records. But the way that the distribution server would know that each of the servers it's distributing to has those records is it could perform counts on this individual GUID, and it could say, let's say every server is supposed to have 5 records. It could ensure that there's 5 records of this individual GUID. And so the thing is, this is an example of where we would apply that to. You could think of it as another practical example would be, imagine if this is galaxies, right? So this would be the GUID of a galaxy, and this is stars within the galaxy. And yeah, I mean, there might actually be more stars than that. There probably actually is. So that would be a good example of where you could apply this, let's say, in the universe. But you would have to get to a universe level type data system before you would enter those type of numbers. But that would be a more practical example. This one would be more of a technical example where you're using, let's say, a distribution server, and it's going to have these GUIDs associated with a batch, and then on the individual server you're going to have GUIDs that are associated with the individual record. So it's unlikely that we would ever face this situation or that we would need to, but in the event that we do, that would be how we would want to proceed with this. And by the way, it's the same is true with like C# or PowerShell. You'll have that unique identifier outside, but then on the individual transaction level, you'll have the unique identifier on the, let's say it was an insert statement values, then we would have the unique identifier on the individual insert. But then we would have one that's declared above, and that we're reusing that variable. And that's what we're doing here. We're reusing this GUID variable, but on the individual, we're using the new ID.